2 days, 2 cars, 2 valve cover gaskets. This time it's the turn of Mr. Wags, the 2007 328 IT. So, in addition to the valve cover gasket, these cars have an eccentric shaft sensor, which is a Hall effect sensor, which senses the rotation of the Valvetronic unit, which is controlled by that actuator, which also has a gasket. And this thing needs spark plugs anyway, so we get to do all that fun stuff. But it's raining outside, so we're not doing anything outside anyway. And Brandon said hi, but screw him, so it's fine. Okay, so if you have a strut bar, that's the first thing to take off. This is a BMW Performance one, 213 mils on each side. Bam. There's also an air induction cover on both sides, and then there's a middle panel as well. These just pull right off with a little rubber tab that you see right there. Push that back, pull this up, it's good. That's got a ton of, looks like 7 mil, maybe 8 mil. We'll go with 8 mil. Fasteners all over it. They're coarse thread, nothing too fancy. The wiring harness is attached to the bulkhead just with a couple little clips. I'll try to get a closer up view of those so you don't break yours. I might have already broken this one, I'm not sure, but either way, strut bar first, plastic thing second, then harness, then we'll take off the actual tray. Then you'll have a little bit better access to actually do this job.
It's a really basic.
So next step here, gonna take out this, I don't even know what it is, some sort of sensor. Just twist it.
Sensor.
Take that out, and then there's 2 little metal teeth clip things. Just pull those off. There's a post there and there. Another 7 mil here. Same on the other side. Once you've done that, as far as I can tell, this thing should be ready to pull toward you and lift up and out. I'll take another look at the harness cover here. It should just be 2 little tabs that you push down on with a standard screwdriver or a pick and then pull out. The wiring harness cover, just pull it out toward you, comes right out. Next step, kind of hard to video, so it's done, but there is a bolt, that one, in there, holds these metal bars in. You either need a very large, I'm guessing E14 E-Torx, or you can use a 14 mil socket, and be careful. There's a 15 mil here on my strut tower brace. I don't know if that's factory, same size or not. There's probably another 13 or a 15 under this cap here. Take those off and then pull the bar out toward you. Just throw it on the ground. Well, that's the bar. You can leave the other side in one, so I'm told. Next up is take the ignition coils out. These are really easy to deal with. Flip that up. Well, mine are not easy to deal with apparently, but flip that up. This plug should push itself out when you do that. Set the wiring aside and then just stick a finger through this and pull outward, give it a nice little tug. The coil will pop right out. Do that for all 6. The 2 on either side of the Valvetronic motor are a little trickier, but you can absolutely do it. The coils are all out. The number 4 and 5 cylinder, I had definite oil sitting in there. Next step up is the Valvetronic actuator. You gotta take the plug off first, pinch it, pull that, set it aside, and then 2 Torx T30s to pull the gasket off the valve cover. And I don't remember if you have to take the 2 little E-Torx off. I think you also have to take those off. I believe those are E8, but I'll undo the 2 T30s first and then see what's up. So yep, the 2 E8s in there, you also have to take off, and there is a 3rd one down right in there. And to get at that, you're going to need to pull up on your wiring harness and actually slide your socket underneath it, and then you should be able to get it out. Once you've got the threads popped, this will visibly move back, and then you should be able to just wiggle it a whole bunch and pop it out. There's your Valvetronic actuator. And this gasket hopefully should look familiar, because you should have bought one, because it's bad. Once that's out of the way, then you can start messing with all the other stuff on the valve cover. Probably going to start with the electrical plug and the eccentric shaft sensor. 8 mil here for the ground. There should be another one in the back. And then perimeter, looks like we have E10 as well as 10 mil in the middle. Oh yeah, And you're probably gonna have to pop the electrical connector off the injectors, but that's not too big a deal either. So to get this harness freed up on this side, there's an 8mm here, and there's an 8mm back there as well, which you can't really see. That's just to ground the ignition coils. On this side, you're gonna take this harness off of your fuel injectors. To do that, I'm sure there's a better way to do it, but I usually just stick a standard screwdriver in between your fuel rail and your electronics, pry it up, and then use a pick to pull the connector open. This tab is normally sitting up there. All you gotta do is pull it off to the side like that, and it should pop right out. Next step, take all of the perimeter bolts off of your valve cover. And do not forget the, looks like 3 internal 10mm hex, just regular standard bolts on the inside. Once you've done that, you should be able to start carefully taking the valve cover up off of the cylinder head. However, that's going to be really, really tricky. The Valvetronic assembly is really, really tall inside of the valve cover, so you're going to have to get creative and swear quite a bit to actually get it up out of the engine bay. There's also a couple of small clips that hold the oxygen sensors to your valve cover on the back. You have to deal with those to gain enough mobility to get it out of the engine bay. One other thing on the back, oil separator hose. If you've worked on a BMW, you've dealt with one of these shitty hoses before, but you gotta either get your fingers in there and press down on it to pull it off, or sneak a pick in one side at a time, rock it off, and then pull it off carefully. If your car is done high miles, 130 or so, that's gonna be
or money.
So it's done. I wish I could tell you tips and tricks to doing that, but basically there are none. Opening the fuse box may be a good idea, just so you can get the harness out of the way a little bit, but you're gonna hang up on this bracket right here. When I put this back in, I'm actually gonna take this off because it's only there for the acoustic cover, which I don't run, and I don't like how it looks anyway. So this was catching on a brake line. That was basically the hard part of this entire job. So now I'm just gonna flip it over, do the valve cover gasket part itself while trying not to lose any hardware. Oh, apparently there's some oil in there. Weird, right? Oh, I can't figure that one out. There's the engine oil that came out of the valve cover gasket. There's the engine oil that came out of sitting on top of the valve cover. Wonder which stuff is dirty. Anyway, when I'm putting the new gasket in, I'll just have to see if the cover does an adequate job of holding the gasket. If it doesn't, use globs of RTV in the channel and then push the gasket in to keep it seated. The hardest part about actually putting this thing back in is making sure that that gasket stays seated and doesn't fold under. Because if it does, you're going to be redoing this job again, and if you got the valve cover out, you know just exactly what that entails. So, time to swap it over and shove it back in. So I got the old crispy wafers that passed for gaskets out. Before I put the new ones on, you can see where I dabbed globs of RTV. That on this car is just to hold these gaskets in, like I said. When you're putting this back on the engine, the last thing you want is one of these things to fall out, because then you have to pull the gasket back off, and nobody has time for that. So at this point, pop these on, pop the perimeter one on, and then carefully set it back down on the engine. At this point, I've got all the gaskets back in. I strongly recommend you change out your eccentric shaft sensor, even if it's not bad. I know the part's a little bit expensive, but if this goes bad, which it will, you have to take the valve cover back off to do it. So it would be silly not to do it while you're in here. It's 3 10mm bolts, 2 on the top, 1 through that hole right there. Literally, take those bolts out, they're captured, you don't have to worry about it. Wiggle it off, put the new one on, and you're cooking with gas. Show you what the new one looks like here. There you go. That's what you're dealing with. Also, here's the gasket for that, which goes into the valve cover. Make sure you replace this as well. Goes right up there. Well, here I am several days later, putting the valve cover back on. The only thing I've done since then is obviously replace the eccentric shaft sensor. And then I put the valve cover on. To do this, I kind of pulled the coolant expansion tank out of the way and just held it there with my forearm. I slid the cover back under this, had it sitting on the Valvetronic tower, and then what you have to do is push the front of the valve cover this way, and then the back of it, the breather will squeeze under this and it will clear the Valvetronic tower. Then you can shift it back that way. And then it should go straight on as long as you are taking care to not damage your seal on your eccentric shaft sensor. Because these little barbs will tear the seal if you're not careful. And then kind of go all the way around it once and make sure you see gasket. Because if it's folded over anywhere, you got to pull it back off and make sure it's good. Otherwise you're going to have a horrible, horrible oil leak. So here it is just sitting on there. My next step is going to be starting from the middle of the valve cover. Sorry for the blur. There we go. Starting from the middle of the valve cover, which is that single 10 mil right there. Tighten that one down just snug, then work your way out in a crossing pattern. So I'll probably go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then so on. Okie doke, it's all tightened back down. If you're going to just be doing these gaskets, you're probably going to want to skip ahead one more video segment, because right now I'm going to be doing the spark plugs on my car, which are standard, I believe they're 16 millimeter hex. So just loosen them all up, and then you may need a stick magnet to actually pull them out if you don't have a proper socket with a little bit of a, I don't know if it's Delrin or rubber that actually keeps the plug in it when you extract it. But for me, I'm just going to loosen them all up, take them out with a magnet, and then I have some replacement plugs to chuck in. On non-turbo cars, this is a 100,000 mile service. On turbos, it's probably 40 to 60,000 miles. I would say probably do 30,000 on a turbo and 80,000 tops on an NA. It's a little bit long, so we'll take them out, look at them, and then throw some new plugs in, and then I will continue buttoning this up with you guys. Plugs are out. They look pretty spent. I've definitely seen much, much worse, but if you compare that nasty schmutz to oily hands makes this tough. There we go. The new hotness, I mean, you can see a lot of the black deposits. That stuff's not conductive, so when you install a new spark plug, you definitely get a more complete burn and a better spark. It's a lot easier on the ignition coil too, so you're not going to be as prone to toasting those things. So to put plugs in, just be careful. Hold the tip of the plug with your finger. Slowly drop it down in there like that. Then take your socket and then thread it in by hand. And then once you've hit the point where you can no longer thread it in by hand anymore, I generally do 2 90-degree turns from that point. So, bear with me just a moment. There it is. Stop by hand. So now, get your ratchet of choice. Flip it to tighten, and then, so right about here, I'm gonna do, there's my first 90. There's my second 90. Should be nice and snug. You do not want to make these uber tight. You risk pulling the threads out of the aluminum cylinder head, but you don't want to make them too loose, because if you make it too loose and they back out, then you're going to start to roast coils and crack valve covers. Repeat for the other 5 cylinders, and then we'll get back to buttoning up everything from this entire job. So the plugs are in. First step for me is going to be this harness here, which I really got out of the way earlier, but that goes on the injector side of the engine. So basically right in here, connect all the plugs in the front, and then that's also part of, oh my word, your harness up here, which has all of your ignition coil, has your eccentric shaft wire, hookup, all that stuff tucked beneath these upper 2. Those always stay above your plastic paneling. So this loom right here clips into the valve cover, And this one will stay put once you've clipped it into the fuel injectors. Literally, that's all there is to that portion. The longest plug goes to one of the cam sensors down there. So just kind of wrap it around. And then, apologies, it's dark. I can't see it either. There's only one plug we disconnected down here. And it makes a nice audible click. One plug there for our oil pressure. Or maybe that's water temp, and then one for our oil pressure. That side's completely done. Do the same thing over here, just click and find the correct tabs, obviously, but press this one into place. Plug in your eccentric shaft sensor. Make sure you get both of your grounds, front and rear, installed. The rear one's kind of hiding on mine. So slip those on, then find your two 8mm nuts, which I will have to dig for because I have no idea where I put them. Get those on, and then next up we're going to be doing the Valvetronic actuator. So get your new gasket and just push it in place. It's not going to stay perfectly put until you have your Valvetronic actuator. Tab faces down. You are going to have to line it up with that little metal tab there. And be careful not to hurt any of the electrical wiring while you're doing this. So just get it to kind of sit locked in like that, and then start with the two smaller inner torques. Actually, you know what? Start with the outers. Start with the outers that hold the gasket to the valve cover, and then do your inner two. So the outers are the coarse thread, the inners are the fine thread. And of course, last but not least, do not forget your lower e-torques. So once you got all three of the little guys tightened down and your two outers, then we're going to move on to the ignition coils. So bolt back down the coolant reservoir, make sure you clip your oil separator hose back in, and at this point I am ready to start putting some plastics back in. So this is going to be the reverse of removal. Start with the lower, work your way to the upper. Again, refer to the beginning of the video for that because I don't really want to cover it again. It's a lot of fiddly stuff and I'd rather be working on it than talking about it. So that's pretty much all there is to it. Hopefully that helped you a little bit. It's not the most straightforward valve cover job in the world, but it's far from the worst I've ever done. So at least it's not a V8, right? So again, I hope that helped. I'll go do a test drive now, make sure nothing leaks, and then it'll probably stay parked, but at least it's done. She's all buttoned up. Live to save another $1. Sweet deal. You might have a little bit of a rough idle while the Valvetronic relearns. The auto response should steadily improve as you drive it though.